close out of these. And just have this up.
How are you guys?
Am I?
Good.
Yeah, I'm in.
Did it not let you in?
There we go.
Oh, I thought you'd clicked it.
No, it says joining.
Okay, there you go.
There we go.
Okay, so Suzanne is online. Hi,
And
Suzanne.
I'm going to.
Bonnie,
Yes,
can you hear me now?
ma'am.
Suzanne,
Hi.
hi.
Are we expecting a Barbara Converser? Riley Timmons
Yes, she's a part of the design workshop.
and Barbara?
Barbara.
Barbara Convisor?
Okay. So when we open it.
Hello. So did that?
Plug in.
Look the Indian on tomorrow, and then wanting people to see that Indian.
I don't want him looking over my shoulder.
Debbie, yay, you made it in person.
Yes, I was always planning to be in person on this one.
Ah, lovely.
All my travels are done, I'm back here for the winter.
Good. Hope your travels were. Hi, Joe. Fun.
They were fun, yeah.
Yay, good. Hello, Joe.
Okay, that'll,
Oh, thank you.
that's gonna be fine.
Hi, Joe. Good, how are you? See ya.
Bonnie, can I just test the screen
Oh,
share?
yes.
You got all dressed up for us.
Of course, well, it's the last meeting before Christmas, we gotta go, we gotta bring some spirit to the place.
And look, you even have the colors or
Absolutely.
holiday colors. Wow. Okay,
But it's not working.
For some reason, it's like as a. Yeah, that's showing.
Joe,
Yes.
are you back? Uh-oh.
Yes, I am, thank goodness.
That's Joe Mason.
Yeah, the other.
Yes, that's
Welcome home.
okay, give me 1 second here.
All right.
Great.
Okay. You're good here.
Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, December 16th, Pickens County Planning and Zoning Commission work session. Present we have Joe, Debbie, Suzanne, and myself. Do we have any commissioner comments before we begin? Planning staff comments?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. Perfect. We are back at it, comprehensive plan work session with Ellen and Hannah.
Thank you, Zach. This is our 6th comprehensive plan work session and final work session on the comprehensive plan. And, next slide. It's helpful to start these meetings by going back, just stepping back to the big picture, going back to the community values that lay the foundation for Vision 2050. And they are to implement bold climate action while balancing our economy, preserving our rural and wild lands, and supporting an equitable and affordable community. So we have a lot to cover tonight. We will review the more significant changes to the August 15th draft comprehensive plan policies now contained in the 12-16 draft in your packet. We are hoping to allocate about 70 minutes to this portion of the discussion. There's a lot to cover here. And then we'll take about 40 minutes or so to walk through the implementation matrix at a high level with a focus on the prioritization of code update actions. And then we'll take about 10 minutes just to walk through next steps and to respond to general questions. But I'd like to add one note here. In the last week, we have received comments from Aspen One, the Roaring Fork Safe Passages Organization, and the Maroon Creek Caucus that came too late to include in your packet or to address in the draft policies we'll be discussing tonight. That said, that input will be reviewed by staff alongside comments that we will receive when we refer the final draft plan out at the end of January in preparation for bringing a final draft plan back to you in March for public hearings for adoption. So those comments won't be discussed tonight necessarily by staff, but they will be addressed and incorporated moving forward. Hannah Hunt is gonna cover a few more slides here coming up and then jump into the policy discussion.
I have one question.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Ellen,
Yes,
I'm sure, I assume that in those comments that you've gotten from the Maroon Creek Caucus, the comments from Baisha Dean were in there regarding employee housing or large-scale employee housing. Do you know that whether, Hannah, you know more about that, I think.
They were not explicitly called out within the comments that we received, but
Oh,
if
I
there
see.
are additional comments that are coming from the Maroon Creek Caucus, certainly we will take and review those. We will say that certainly this plan will be, once we have this work session, right, where we're making the final kind of recommendations and P&Z is ready for this to go out to public comment. The draft will be formally referred to the caucuses and we will, receive all comments at that point, but.
Okay, and is that approximately January?
Correct, yeah, we're anticipating that we will have this meeting, take final recommendations from the planning commission. We will consolidate, integrate all of the feedback in addition to the comments that we have recently received in the last week, as Ellen noted. And then we'll be with a final draft plan, not just the policies that we'll review tonight, but with all the introductions and the appendices and studies, and that will be posted and referred at the end of January.
Okay, thank you so much.
and just as a note, individuals are also welcome to submit comments if they have any. So
Okay, thank you.
that to the mix, thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Great, so kind of speaking of timeline, so you all have been along with us through the ride. We are on the right side of the column. I think it's also helpful, there's a lot of material, but you all have seen this as we've been working through this iteratively. This is the final work session before we again finalize the comp plan and move into the referral process. We are just helpful to remind us kind of whose role is what. Community at large has been providing feedback throughout this process through both formal engagement and additional comments that have come to Ellen and myself through surveys or open houses over the last year and a half. The work group is the Vision 2050 work group, which were members of the Community Growth Advisory Committee. Caucus members were invited to attend that as well. That has been a guiding force throughout this process to make sure that we're staying true to the recommendations of the Growth Committee's final report. Planning Commission, as per the statute, is making and adopting the plan. We've been in the making portion of that for much of the last year and a half. So reviewing, providing feedback, and then the final plan that Planning Commission adopts will then go to the commissioners for their final checkbox and approval. just a kind of full summation of the community engagement events that have happened over the last 2 years, which has been really a rigorous effort to make sure that this plan is putting an ear to community feedback through different variety of different mediums, both digital and in person. The summary of all of those events and kind of summation of their input is in this 24 and 25 engagement draft, which is included within the packet. That captures especially the events that happened this fall that were the open houses through October. So just to make sure that we're tracking that. So now we get to the meat of the conversation tonight, which is the updated comprehensive plan policies. Again, this is revisions based on input received from the open houses, from caucus meetings, from caucus members, community survey, general public, internal staff review, and ultimately the work sessions that we've been doing with the planning commission. And using this as really an iterative policy development. So want to, as we go through this, there's a lot of content. Again, you've seen this all before. We'll call out what tweaks and adjustment we've made. We wanna make sure that we're making reasonable and accurate modifications, or if there's additional clarifications or additions that you all would like us to include before we go to put the final stamp on it and refer out this document. So that's the purpose of tonight. And I'm going to move us through the natural environment section. I would say feel free to stop and flag if there's any point that you all, as the planning commission, have a question. We will move through this and then kind of take a break at each section, but to the chair as well, if there's a place where you'd like us to pause, happy to do so. Kind of big picture, again, I think it's helpful, as Ellen was saying at the beginning, just the big thrust of each of these sections. We thought it was helpful to just bring us back to that. For the natural environment, preserving and protecting our natural environment continues to be the primary real through line and kind of drumbeat throughout this document, pulling forward the work of caucus master plans, of original land use policy direction that the county has been really prioritizing over the last 40, 50 years. Deploying county regulations and programs to support our natural environment, again, making sure that the land use policy direction is in support of preserving and protecting our natural environment. Along those lines, mitigating the human impacts to our natural environment, establishing broad partnerships, again, for that protection, and really ensuring that caucus master plans, this is specific to the natural environment, but that input is present. And many of the caucus master plans have really specific rural preservation and characteristics related to our natural environment that we wanted to make sure are captured within this document. So those are the kind of big picture. As we dive into the natural resources and biodiversity, and I will just note again also for folks that are in the room, we have within this packet both the 815, so the policies that were present the August 15th, and then the revisions to that, which are dated 12/16. So what we're showing here is kind of a high level, but certainly all of that material is in the packet. So the feedback related to natural resources and biodiversity is consistent with what we reviewed on the 815 draft. As Ellen noted, we did receive some feedback from Safe Passages, which have Roaring Fork Safe Passages, which do have some tweaks, recommendations to tweak some of the language within the section, which we will review and bring forward. But the policy statements in the 12/16 draft are consistent with the 815 draft in some. I'm gonna just keep moving unless there's something else you'd like me to do. But I'll look to you, Chair. So water quality and quality. So generally, this is consistent with the 815 draft. There's a few tweaks in here to add some additional detail or clarify intent or rename a policy to make sure that it's clear. There's been additional feedback on this that comes from caucuses, from Northwest COG and their QQ, their Quality and Quantity Committee and their review, Pickens County Healthy Rivers and Streams, additional input prioritizing this section from the fall engagement, and also the county attorney's office reviewed this. We have within this section some additional kind of citations noting the reference to the Senate Bill 174, which gives direction for this section. And also there's an additional, this policy 2.24 is an addition that was brought forward by recommendation from the Caucus and Healthy Rivers and Streams Board, recognizing the relationship between augmentation impacts to stream flows. I can dive into that more if you would like me to, but that's the kind of highlights for this. And specifically that policy is encourage augmentation plans that replace the depletion in location and in time in an effort to maintain and enhance the quantity and quality of in-stream flows. So that's the policy addition that's in this section 2. I'll keep going. Agricultural lands, again, policy statements generally consistent with the 815 draft. We added in the definition of agricultural production just upfront. That came from a discussion with the Planning Commission to just make sure that that was really clear what we mean when we talk about agricultural production. And that's included in the definition that's just starts out that policy section. That definition, agricultural production defined as production of foods and other goods that come from plants, animals, microorganism, including grazing, haying, livestock raising, and crop production. That's consistent with the definition we had before. We just made sure that was up front. The section, so 4, air quality. Here there was some really good discussion feedback that came out of the fall engagement, came out of feedback from the caucuses, had some internal discussions, internal to Pickens County with the Environmental Health Department. There are 3 policies that are added here in response to comments and feedback. So 4.2 is added related to the monitoring of air quality, which recognizes the air quality impacts associated with the use and activity of Highway 82 and Aspen Pickens County Airport. So some specific aspects related to monitoring. 4.3 climate impacts on air quality. So recognizing the awareness of change in our local climate on our local air quality. And then also advocating for research development for federal standards related to nanoparticles. And that was, again, came forward from our feedback from community and also directly from our public health, environmental health department rather. So you'll see those changes in that number 4 air quality section. I'm going to go to 5, which is scenic quality. Again, the majority here is carried forward from the 815 draft. And through a variety of different caucus discussions that happened throughout the fall, had good feedback that supported the policies that are in this section. We did make a tweak to policy 5.3, the siting of solar arrays and other on-site renewables related to a commissioner comment to make sure that there was just kind of that we were ensuring that the efficiency of the renewable energy system is not prioritized over the scenic value. You'll see how that is reading, that's recognizing the associated impacts, and then with considerations for energy generation, but recognizing that all of those different considerations should be in the mix when thinking about the siting, not just efficiency. So that was a good comment, has been captured in that policy. Public lands and open space is policy area 6. And so in this, there have been some refinements and additions based on feedback from the Aspen Sopers Ranger District, coordination with our fellow staff at Open Space and Trails and public input during the fall engagement. I'll highlight that policy 6.6 and 6.7 have been one refined, one added to address the transfer of private inholdings of private inholdings to public land, and then kind of the opposite of that, limitations on the privatization of public land. So we felt that it was through discussions, it was important to recognize those two different cases and put policy language that gives considerations for those conditions, private land to public and privatization of public lands. Questions? Should we carry on? Okay, recreation and tourism, that's section 7 within the natural environment. So again, generally carried forward from the 815 draft. A few minor tweaks here. Policy 7.2 has been added on feedback from the community open houses, but specific to highlight considerations for public access to public lands, and also make sure that's in accordance with that state statute 3028-106, which asks comprehensive plans to address a variety of recreation tourism impacts with an eye toward access. So that 7.2 has been added. And then when we added that, got added in the alpine ski areas, that jumped to B7, policy 7.3. And there was a good discussion with the planning commission related to that policy statement, which has been revised to just recognize that the county does not, or the policies are not supporting new alpine ski areas, but there are considerations for ski area expansion. So just making sure that was more clear, and that was in response to a good discussion with the planning commission.
So in 7.2, language says Pickens County supports the expansion of uses within or directly adjacent to existing permitting ski area boundaries. So are we,
Sorry, the old 7.2.
that's the old 7.2, and then how has it changed?
So the clarification was in 7.2, which was the previous one.
Yeah.
Started with Pickens County supports the expansion of uses, and the direction from the commissioners was to reorder that to just start with saying, we do not support new alpine ski areas, but will consider expansion of uses within or directly adjacent to, and then lists out. The feedback was, if that policy leads with, we support expansion of uses, kind of just basically as that was written previously, was without kind of additional qualification, that was could suggest overly supporting of expansion of existing use. So it was rather to say, hey, first, we'd rather not have new ski areas. However, if there's expansion, here are the different things to consider. So it's a little bit of semantics, but the way that was reorganized was to be able to give the opportunity to provide more clarification and qualification over what those expansion of uses might, should consider.
Okay.
And my recollection is that the revised policy is similar to the existing policy in the land use code today with some additional clarification.
It seemed like somewhere when I was studying last night, I read something about supporting maybe additional or expansion of Nordic trails. I don't see it in this section, so it's obviously in it.
So,
I think it's there.
yeah, so in the previous, 815 Nordic ski areas was 7.3, because we added that access policy in the new draft 1216, it's 7.4. So that statement reads, Pickens County supports existing Nordic ski systems and the expansion of Nordic ski system in alignment with the Pickens County Nordic Trails Management Plan, Ashcraft Ski Touring, and the Spring Gulch Mount Sopris Nordic Council.
And that also.
So that's still in there, and that was consistent with that was carried forward from the policy in 815.
And I believe it's carried forward for the most part from existing policy, again, in the land use code today.
Right, okay.
with some additions to just make sure that all of the Nordic ski areas currently in the county are captured, because
Yeah.
the existing land use policy does not mention, Spring Gulch
Correct, correct.
or Ashcroft, actually.
And then policy 7.8, what was the change that referenced the Alfred Lockhart system?
Basically, the policy before that we had in 815 just spoke to the 10th Mountain Division.
Oh, okay.
And Braun said, hey, let's make sure, like, we are also,
Yeah.
and we, the intent was that was kind of inclusive within, but we wanted to call that Alfred A. Braun out specifically. Anything else there? Those are good questions. Thanks for the eagle eye, Debbie. Okay, the last section was environmental hazards, which is in, the 1216 draft is consistent with the summer draft, basically, that was carried forward and did receive in the fall engagement some good support and endorsement of that policy direction. So that's a quick wrap on the natural environment policies. I wanna just make sure from the planning commission if there's any other questions. The packet certainly had more details of each minor modification that were made, so happy to address any questions that you all might.
In the recreation and tourism section.
Yeah.
And we'll go to that.
Yeah.
Do we wanna mention special events there? And just, I'm asking group, I believe special events are under, currently in the county environmental health. Do we wanna say something about that in land use?
I'll let Ellen
Yeah.
speak to where those live, but
Yeah, we will, we do address special events under the built environment, chapter,
in the
Un-
land use
under the
section.
land use provisions, so I will cover that briefly tonight. We can delve in if need be.
The thinking of organizing it that way, Joe, is just to make sure that when you're kind of going to the section about what uses make sense where, you're kind of within one section of the document. If it's helpful though, we have these kind of complementary policies, we could make a note in the complementary policies to just point to that section so that there's a, kind of an arrow to where that might live. If that would be, does that seem like a appropriate?
It seems like it, I just don't want it to get lost. And
Yeah.
it seems like it does span the two.
It does, I agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, that's a great note. Anything else from the commissioners? Okay. Excellent, well, hoping that feels generally familiar and a lot of work from this group and you all to help us refine and get to that point. So I will pass to Ellen to go through the built environment.
right, and again, if we go to the next slide, we wanna just ground this chapter and discussion in the broad community direction that we've received over the decades and recently, with the focus on reducing intensity related to large residential development in rural areas. That's something that we definitely have gotten feedback from the Community Growth Advisory Committee on, and a lot of community input on. Stand strong on environmental protections and rural preservation. That is something that has carried forward for decades and continues to be a really a priority for the community in general. Prioritize community housing development that meets our community values. That's an issue that continues to be significant for the community. And then strengthen the land use and building codes. Again, an ongoing sentiment, we can always do better and improve the land use and building codes to make sure they're representing our values moving forward. So, moving to the first section within the built environment, climate action. Here, the policy statements are generally consistent, again, with the summer draft that you've reviewed. Definitely supported by public input received during our community engagement and events. One modification was made in response to Planning Commission comment, that was specific to policy 01.7, electrification of the built environment. The need to emphasizing the need to acknowledge aspects that must be addressed as part of a transition from non-renewables to electrification, right? It's a transition, and there are things that we need to address in the interim. And I am gonna move through these too, and please stop me if you have questions or I need to clarify. So, under land use, which is a pretty lengthy section of the built environment, as you'd imagine. Again, the policy statements are generally consistent with the 815 draft. However, modifications have been made to incorporate additional land use policies, add detail and clarify intent based on feedback from you all, from the caucuses, community input, received during the fall engagement, and internal staff comments and review by the Pickens County Attorney's Office. With all of that, I'll start by saying significantly, as you all know, all of the community housing policies that were previously included across several chapters in the 815 draft plan have been consolidated into one distinct community housing section within the built environment chapter, and we'll go into some detail when we get there. Next slide. So, the land use, let me look at this for a second. Right. So the land use section of the built environment chapter is actually divided into a couple of different subsections. We have land use patterns, development standards, and site constraints. We'll go through each of those. The site constraints section of the built environment chapter had no changes. There were no changes there. But I'll start with changes that were made to the land use patterns section. Just one. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. The addition of policy 02.14, it was regarding updates to caucus area master plans, essentially the need to facilitate updates to those plans to inform land use patterns and policies moving forward. That was something that was added. The development standards section had several modifications. The first is relating to, it's 02.2.3, consideration for additional floor area allocation. There was a lot of discussion at the CGAC with respect to this item. Basically, the change that was made was to clarify that allocation of residential floor area exceeding 5,750 square feet will be subject to an altogether new floor area calculation system and criteria, separate and distinct from the growth management system for new residential development rights on new lots. A lot of discussion was had at CGAC, as I said. Happy to jump into any more detail there if need be. And that recommendation was made by staff primarily to say, hey, this needs to be entirely new and distinct and different. There was revision to policy 02.3.8, site development standards to mitigate impacts of increased square footage. Basically to emphasize the need to leverage fees as a component of tiering in the land use code to mitigate impacts of large homes and support community benefits. Again, this was, I believe this was recommended by CGAC and internal staff as well. And then revision to policy 02.2.9. transferable development rights. Basically, we revised this section, the section remains mostly intact from the 815 draft that you reviewed, but we've added additional TDR standards to reflect the specific CGAC recommendations for modifications to the TDR program. We added standards to emphasize the value of rural remote zone district TDR sending sites, and the need to reduce the potential impacts of additional floor area on receiving sites. We added some specific language that could be used as a policy basis for specific code amendments moving forward. And again, we can walk through those if need be, but I will keep moving forward in the next slide. So the 815 draft contained a policy referencing the need to establish standards and location criteria for short-term rentals and special events, Joe, and retail marijuana. It was a fairly general, a broad policy relating to those topic areas. That policy was reworked to be consistent with the licensing and regulation standards for these uses, all three of them, that already exist in the county code, outside of the land use code. So we wanted to be sure that anything in the land use code that may be added is consistent with that county code language, which is very specific, and I think some of it's probably based in some state statute. So that is the change that was made there. Again, if we want to walk through any of that, we can. But that is, I'll leave it at that unless you have specific questions and move on. Questions, anybody? Joe?
One question I had regarding the maximum floor area with regard to, you said completely new development. Is that, how are we defining completely new development? That means subdivided new lot that didn't previously just had no housing footprint on it? How restricted is that?
So, let me go to the provision. Basically, the distinction that's, let me go back here. So,
It's more like, what's the intent? I doubt we're gonna articulate the specifics in this document, but what's behind this and
what
what's
was
envisioned?
what was intended here was to, so there was conversation about reworking the criteria and the allocation system for additional floor area above 5,750 square feet as a separate process from the growth management system that is used to allocate a new development right on a new lot or parcel for up to 5,750 square feet. So when we talk, and I'm not sure I'm answering this directly, but right now, the growth, yeah, Suzanne can jump in.
I mean, I think your question is, are we only talking about a new house and exceeding 5,750? Are we talking about you have something today and you're also going to add to it? I mean, is that kind of where your question was headed?
Yeah, kind of where's,
I mean, I think
against how many of these are we likely to see?
I think
Is
the
more-
intent clearly is to talk about any home, whether it's existing home, getting more floor area, or from the get-go, a new lot that's created and how much floor area they have the potential to acquire through the system. We're trying to capture both of those. Is that, I mean, the intent, which is under the code today as well as going forward, is additional floor area is for an existing house, or a new lot that's being created might come in and say, I wanna build 9250 from the get-go. You know, how do I do that? You're competing in growth management for that entire amount. You have an existing house you wanna expand, you're in, looking at the additional floor area separately.
Right, now we have a bifurcated process and
I mean, I think the short version, and again, we had lots of conversations with the growth committee, is that the growth management scoring system has not been the most effective process. Is that a fair way of saying that? I look at Zach, he's been through a number of them, to, to go through for that additional floor area. So we clearly wanted to look at what would a process look like that would be different, and what would the standards and criteria be that we'd attach to that, but it wouldn't necessarily be a scoring, the same way we score a growth management application for a new lot or parcel that's being created. Like, so in a way, growth management goes back to what it was originally, which is, I'm creating new lots and parcels, and I have an allocation for that. There's something separate in a system to deal with people who want more floor area for their homes.
Just if one is more favorable than the other, then people might try to pile into the one that's more favorable, and then we're dealing with allocation differences and deciding which one goes where and facing lots of challenges. So I just wanna make sure you guys have thought about that, you probably have, and we don't have to discuss it any further tonight.
And yeah, it's a good question, and how those definitions are clearly laid out, because there's so many different variations to this that are being used right now, whether you have a pre-existing lot that has a foundation, the home gets scraped or partially scraped, or if it gets gutted and rebuilt to the studs, or there's lots of homes right now that are getting half of the footprint scraped and then rebuilt to maintain that existing square footage that's over 8750, and how that all, there's so many different levels to that, and how that works into this new language, cause there's just, there's not a lot of new lots and new and so a lot of the development is going to be in this sort of weird middle ground, and how we can.
Yeah, and maybe just to say one note, just in terms of speaking to your comment about the definitions, we've been making sure, and the definitions are not included in the policy document, but this update will be in the full, updated plan, to make sure that those definitions for remodel, redevelopment, right, are consistent across what the plan, what the policy document has as what the, what the building code is saying, so that we're speaking the same language when the policy is making a statement that can be translatable from a code standpoint too.
And the discussion around redevelopment, scrape and replace, definitely was front and center for the CGAC, and definitely something that we are going to wanna address head on. That was made clear as a need. And defining terms is always critical.
So these are things that we will have in our future to work out.
The definitions will be in the future to work out. Let's see where
Yes.
that policy related to redevelopment. There's a few different
There's
places where
several
that shows up
policies.
in the building section, I believe.
That do speak to redevelopment, and there's more than one. There's
Yeah,
some
primarily-
policies, go ahead, if you've got it.
When you get to section 4, we can talk about through those, but.
Yeah, right, we do have some incentives associated with redevelopment to encourage people to build smaller, as an example, more energy efficient. But, so we'll touch on a few of those, and again, we can delve in if need be, into more specific policies than were captured here on the slides.
If I may, there
And just, no, go ahead.
just a couple of other dimensions that I'm more asking if we would need an anchor in this document to pursue these later on, but the concepts I'm thinking of are, first of all, some limitation on changes in the future. You talked about the consistency across applications at a single point in time, but we've had a lot of policy changes across time in very short periods of time recently. I think it could behoove the industry to have some stability, say a 2-year and 3-year change schedule, so that they know it's coming up and can prepare. And then related to that, I'll speak from personal experience, there are general contractors that are just unaware of this kind of stuff and do things that cross the owner from one boundary to another at great cost to the owner. Can we speak to continuing education for contractors? I know contractor licensing is at the city of Aspen level, it's not at the county level. But I think as these requirements become more complex and as the technology for energy efficiency and things like that become more sophisticated, contractors need to be brought along the curve to guarantee that, or help ensure that somebody's gonna get a contract that is ready to handle
Yeah.
these types of requirements.
And I can speak to that just a bit. I mean, so the county has participated in with the kind of tri-county area as well as the, municipalities, this net zero regional roadmap, which has now been in its kind of phase 2, which is basically to say, hey, these different counties, we're all trying to kind of achieve these different goals from a climate performance standpoint. We may be at different points along this kind of trajectory, but we're generally kind of aiming in the same direction. And that coalition really came together to address exactly what you're saying, recognizing that, hey, I might be living in Carbondale, but I'm working in, some other county, Basalt, and, there's different codes. They have moved from this kind of, here's our roadmap document to now implementation, which includes a lot of that kind of code training and kind of workforce kind of resources to try to make sure that that's addressed, recognizing that we're in a really multi-jurisdictional, environment where the AHJ could be really different based on where you live, but making sure that that's, there's resources out there to support that. So that's something that is happening currently, but certainly there's intent to make sure that we address that. I can point out a few places in the implementation plan where that's recognized. There's also, just because we're on that, in the building section, there's a policy that talks about coordination between building and energy codes with additional other jurisdictions and counties. So I think that speaks to your comment, Joe. And then also just within that building section, 4.4 existing residential buildings, so incentivize to improve energy efficiency to existing residential buildings. 4.5, redevelop large homes at a smaller size, incentives to encourage residential development to utilize existing footprints or smaller, not exceed final maximum floor area. 4.6, residential building demolition, discourage residential demolition replacement of recently constructed homes to reduce construction demo waste, kind of et cetera. 4.7, substantial remodel, implement standards for substantial remodels and alterations above 500 square feet that incentivize and result in increased energy and efficiency. So I think those are the places where we're trying to get at that, again, kind of carrying forward that through line of the CGAC, to just kind of, address that certainly the redevelopment is going to be where the majority of what comes across your desk is, going to be located, and so that there's policies to kind of provide that support for, direction.
This one's not so much what comes across our desk the first time, it's whether a contractor actually is qualified to do
Sure,
what we want done under this code. And
from an education standpoint, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe there's a place that again, it's in the implementation, we can take that note and see if that education piece can kind of, where that gets infused, because I think that's it's
Yeah,
important.
Great
Yeah, it's a good
idea.
comment.
And, I think it will be incumbent upon us, when we get into code amendments, the public hearing process, to make sure that we're informing as many of the people who will be impacted by the changes to the codes, to try to get them as involved as we can. And public hearing process is that's one of the things it's intended to do, but it's a good call out. We really need to be diligent to the extent we can be, right? Okay, and yeah, adding something perhaps to the implementation matrix, saying education is probably gonna have to be a part of the discussion moving forward.
Yeah, it's in there, we can make sure that that's prioritized.
So, good comment there, thank you. I think, We've already covered this one, so we'll move to the next slide. Thanks. Right, so here we are, this is the new and improved community housing section of the built environment chapter, and so you've seen most of the policies here under this section in the previous draft, just consolidated here. There are some revisions, again, based on input that we've received. There's revision to policy 03.8, leverage the caretaker dwelling units to support community housing. This policy was revised to add a recommendation for implementation of a standard to allow CDUs of up to 1,500 square feet. And that the current standard is 1,000 square feet for a CDU. And this recommendation was made by several in public comment, public engagement that we heard, basically to accommodate small families, more so than the current size does. At the last work session meeting with, I think it was the last one, with the Planning and Zoning Commission, there was a lot of discussion about affordable housing mitigation fees and the fact that at least one planning commissioner expressed support, several I think, for preference of built housing as housing mitigation, as a preference over payment of a mitigation fee, an impact, a mitigation housing fee. So this section 3.13 has been somewhat revised, but we did discuss the concept with the county attorney and with internal staff. And basically, the upshot is that we carried forward current policy requiring development to mitigate for affordable housing impacts based on state statute and county attorney direction. Draft policy in the current plan reflects current county practice of requiring payment of fees, but allowing for a partial payment in combination with alternative options, including built housing. The policy is also revised to include a recommendation to, as the planning commissioners suggested, to explore an affordable housing credit program to work with municipalities to see if that's something that could be implemented across jurisdictions or just within the county. So, yeah, we didn't actually, we started out to say, hey, we'd like to say that built housing is the preference for housing mitigation over a payment of an impact fee. But state statute really speaks directly to payment, allows us to ask for an impact fee for housing directly, and so the policy is generally remains intact from the policy that we have in place today. But clarifying that policy as it's written today, or as it may be modified, I think we're working on that mitigation policy as we speak. It does allow for partial payment of that mitigation fee with some alternatives for built housing on-site or off-site, and some other options. So that's how that policy was addressed. And then,
So Ellen.
Yeah.
State statute prohibits the county from asking for, or from, what was the legal, what was the?
I think the simple statement would be that we have, legally under statute adopted an impact fee as our mitigation.
Right.
And we provide alternatives to paying that fee, which include all the options for providing on and off-site housing. But in terms of policy, again, we have sort of strong statements towards the adoption and, use of that impact fee, and we don't wanna undermine that, the legal underpinnings of that. But that today in the code and going forward, this policy and code will always provide an alternative for somebody who, wants to provide, on real housing, on-site, off-site, whatever it may be, to come in and say, I'd rather do this than pay the fee, and we can accept that.
Does the code if we could get feedback in the future from Rye or, would we be allowed to, and I think Suzanne might wanna follow up on this, but we be allowed to keep the existing structure of the cash in lieu, right? But incentivize, is there some mechanism where we can keep the structure the same as a state statute, but incentivize actually a homeowner who wants to build the employee housing? Is there some way that we can keep the existing structure in, but somehow incentivize someone who,
To build on site or off-site
yeah,
structure.
I mean, I think, there were discussions, right, I mean, and more probably in the caretaker dwelling unit realm, but is an incentive, obviously, giving people floor area is always an incentive, again, that's not a fully deed restricted unit, it's not mitigation, the way it works under our code today. But again, I don't think anything about this policy would, not allow us to look at other ways to try and encourage, but I think what we're trying to say is we have an impact fee regime, and we're also more than, happy to accept other alternatives. But the attorney was pretty strong in favor and saying, we don't wanna flip that and say, we really want everybody to mitigate by giving us on-site housing, because
We don't have a basis for that legally.
Right, we don't have the basis for that, so
Yeah.
we have the basis for the impact fee.
yeah, cause I'm just wondering because we did have some strong feedback from that, from the P and Z board, from myself, Suzanne,
Sure,
Doug,
yeah.
about the reality of actual housing versus impact fees.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So if there is a legal structure that exists that we don't wanna break or mess with, that is tied to these impact fees, if there is a way that we can somehow incentivize someone to build the housing over the impact fees, that's something that could be asked of legal.
Well,
Yeah.
concerning that, I mean, then can these units then be deed restricted? Because I think the city tried this and that, incentivized ADUs, and they all turned out being guest houses, offices, an extra bedroom, a game room, whatever. None of them ended up getting rented out. So I don't wanna give away more floor area for someone's,
Well,
just
and
giving it away without it turning into housing for somebody.
And that's, I think, a whole conversation about if we want CDUs to be, again, a viable option to provide housing throughout the county. How do we go about that? And again, this is just the policy level, but, the type of deed restriction that goes with that now, which, is not a full deed restriction, it is not required to be rented, it's not required to be occupied. Again, if we want to create incentives to get more people to do that, how do we tie that together with what we want is for those to actually be occupied units? But right now, none of those, for the county's purposes, qualify as mitigation, a CDU, because it doesn't have a strong deed restriction.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I- as you may remember, that policy has disgusted me for a long time because I don't think that we get what we give. I don't think it's an even trade. I know that throughout most of this planning, well, let me say first that when Kara came, was there the night we were discussing this not too long ago.
Yeah.
She spoke up strongly for the present practice. And what she summed it up by saying, change whatever you need to change, or consider changing whatever you need to get to a more fair trade, but don't get rid of the impact, the mitigation, the cash in lieu. And she went on to talk about how that cash in lieu is used in a number of ways, buy downs and such. That gave me a slightly different lens through which to look at this policy. However, it's still, if we still are saying development should pay its own way, and that has been the case since the land use code was written in the 70s, and that was the philosophy all along. We're not getting there. And I know, well, then I have two questions. I think that you all have, throughout this whole process, sought out best practices across the country and maybe out of the country. I wonder if you've pursued them along these lines, having to do with how development pays its own way, specifically in ways that if people build here, live here, and create employees, then they should house them. Maybe one of the answers is that we should go up on the impact fees. How is that measured? How is that indexed each year?
So a couple things, Suzanne, I mean, all of that is yeah, good feedback. You know, yes, we will be looking at the impact fee and whether it is, doing what it's intended to do. I think it's really important to realize that before we had the impact fee, we only got housing mitigation in the subdivision context. So when we adopted impact fees, it meant that it was applying throughout the county across the board with development over 5750. I mean, again, that was the threshold we adopted at the time. But before that, if you had a pre-existing lot, you came in to build 15,000 square feet on your Starwood lot, there was no mitigation required for that. The impact fee is what allows us to do that across the board throughout the county. So again, there's a lot of, legal basis for that, and I think, right, it's, obviously that's important, but that was a big deal when the county said, no, we recognize that all of these are creating impacts, we need to address that across the board, and that's why, an impact fee was adopted at that time. But yes, clearly making sure that that impact fee is, is mitigating for those impacts, is something we are looking at and will continue.
With that said, it seems that the more we can reduce the size of houses across the board, the less impact, undue impact it will have on the county and all the rest of us. And maybe that's the trade-off.
And Suzanne, there are several policies, and we'll touch on some of them tonight, that do absolutely speak to incentivizing or using other methods to reduce house size, to limit those impacts to the community relating to housing and traffic and others. So they're yes to that comment. And also to Debbie's comment about making sure that deed restricted units are used for the purpose they are intended to be used for, they are occupied as intended. There was also a lot of discussion at the CGAC about that topic and the fact that we have units that were in theory to be used as affordable housing that have not been used that way historically, and there's a real need for enforcement. And
yes,
there are some policies specific to caretaker dwelling units in the draft that you have, talking specifically to enforcing use and occupancy of existing CDUs for community housing and requiring and enforcing deed restriction of new units for use and occupancies. So it's definitely something that, was at the forefront of discussions with CGAC and is incorporated, across, at least very specifically under the caretaker dwelling unit provisions, in the draft you have.
And I would just add and say, there's a lot of, this is the policy environment that poises us for the next step for code updates and program updates. And there are some really interesting case studies of other communities that have done, I don't know exactly forget who mentioned that, but there's, we're looking forward to being able to move from this policy into the next steps. And I think that this allows us to really prioritize, addressing those concerns through some good examples that we have, kind of studied and are in the works of understanding in the meantime through our research process.
So for me, it underlines and places in bold type the need to reduce the size of housing, because we reduce the size of the impacts considerably when we do that. And that may substitute in part for a policy that it seems we have to hold on to.
And Suzanne, going back to the broad community direction, the first bullet that I walked through says, reduce intensity related to large residential development in rural areas. It's definitely been front and center in discussion that was had at CGAC, that we've heard from during our public engagement process. So absolutely, that is something that has been reiterated over and over, and I do believe there's several policies in the draft plan that speak to that issue. So,
Thank you.
yeah, and great comments. If I may, I'll just go to the last bullet on this slide here. Under community housing, also based on discussion at the last work session, a policy was added recommending partnerships with municipalities to explore remaining opportunities for housing within the urban growth boundary areas. I think there was, we don't need to delve back into that discussion, but good direction from the last meeting, I believe from the Planning and Zoning Commission, so that's been added. And then the next slide, just want to touch on policy 03.14. A lot of discussion was had about community housing location with consideration for urban growth boundaries. That policy remains basically unchanged in this draft, and we just wanted to make you aware of the fact that
From the 815 draft.
from the
just to be
815
clear.
draft, and a lot of time and effort went into crafting those policies, and I think we got good community support for the draft policy as it's written, and also generally support from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that is unchanged from your last draft. The next section, I think we've touched on a few of the things here already, but this section is specific to the topic of buildings. Basically, again, the statements that have been added are in response to feedback primarily from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And Suzanne, this speaks directly, policy 04.5 speaks directly to your comment. It's redevelop larger homes at a smaller size to incentivize redevelopment of large homes within the existing building footprint, or at a smaller size to limit impacts and achieve climate action goals. And this is responding directly to the fact that right now you can redevelop a 15,000 square foot home at the existing size per the land use code today. And this is just suggesting that we incentivize replacement of those existing large homes within the existing building footprint or at a smaller size, right? And then Again, policy 04.8 is speaking to encouraging residential remodels as an alternative to scrape and replace, to reduce embodied carbon impacts and achieve climate action goals. This is something that also was, I think, discussed at some length by the Community Growth Advisory Committee, and to some extent by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So again, I'm gonna try to move us through, we've got a lot to cover here, but interrupt me, stop me if need be. Transportation and mobility, these policy statements have been slightly modified from the 815 draft. Again, in response to feedback received from the Planning Commission, caucuses, and internal staff. So, a micro-transit option policy was added to address the need for on-demand options in addition to fixed route options for rural neighborhoods. I think, Joe Mason, this may have been one of the things that you raised. We certainly heard from caucuses on this topic, the fact that, there need to be some alternatives to fixed route options for those neighborhoods that aren't currently necessarily getting year-round bus service on fixed routes.
Yeah, I didn't bring up microtransit, but I agree that especially in Woody Creek, there needs to be consistent service.
Yeah, right. This was an alternative this was an option for trying to deal with that issue. Internal staff also recommended the addition of a policy to encourage employer-supported transportation alternatives. There was nothing in the 815 draft to that point. Policy 05.2J was revised to use the term passenger rail, support for passenger rail, as opposed to light rail, which apparently is not likely to be feasible here based on population and other factors. And then slight edits and clarifications were also made to policies around aerial tramways and gondolas, based on Planning Commission input, Highway 82 traffic flow and safety, and development concurrency with existing transportation infrastructure. Those changes were made in response to input from the Planning Commission and the county engineer, respectively. Again, we can dive into those if need be, but if not, I will move on to the next section, which is waste management. And so here, a policy statement was added to incorporate feedback from the Planning and Zoning Commission, I think, Joe, this was you, to address household waste. So the policy is 06.4, reduce household waste. It was added and is consistent with current landfill waste management policy direction. Right, good, that was a good add, thank you. And moving to the next section, resilient infrastructure, no changes here from the 815 draft. Yeah, those policy statements have been carried forward into the current draft. And, sorry, did I miss something there?
The screen may be,
Frozen?
it's moving on my side, but
Okay,
it's not there. Here, let me try to reshare.
well, and if not, I can even continue to walk us through.
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, so
I got kicked off this.
we covered waste management, resilient infrastructure, there were no changes to that section from the 815 draft. And then I'll move us through, fortunately, there weren't a lot of changes here, so I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on them. The last section of the built environment, the second to last, covered utilities. There was one minor adjustment made to the utilities section, it was policy 08.1, logical extension of utilities. It was revised to add a C to prioritize electric over natural gas utility extensions when and where utility extensions are appropriate. This was a recommendation that came from the Planning and Zoning Commission. I don't remember which of you suggested it, but yeah, that has been added accordingly. And then the last section under built environment is cultural and historic resources. No changes have been made from the 815 draft there. Policy statements have been carried forward in the draft in your packet. So I'll pause there before we move into the next chapter. Any more questions or comments relating to the built environment chapter? Clearly, this is your bailiwick. I mean, a lot of this is your focus. And there'll be a lot more to come as we move into code amendments, but yeah, I hope that your input has been incorporated in this draft, and we'll see what we get back, once we get a final draft pulled together, once we have more, we've referred the plan out and get more public input. But that's where we are today, and it looks like we're back, and so I'm gonna, unless there are questions, thoughts, more clarifications, we'll move into the community and economic health chapter, and Hannah Hunt is gonna cover that. Briefly, we're getting there.
Great, got an unknown error message, but we're back. So broadly speaking, community and economic health, the kind of big picture themes that are in this chapter are commitment to engage the workforce, and that's really about workforce that's regardless of where workforce lives, so that participate in the Pickens County economy regardless of whether or not that's living in Pickens County. Prioritizing mental and physical health and recognizing the connection between the community and economic stressors and our physical and mental health. So recognizing that as a key to prioritize for community well-being. Critical community services, which we had a really robust discussion about last P&Z meeting, and that's been really captured and kind of moved up front within this document. And as well as came out of a lot of different conversations throughout the fall, open houses, commissioner meetings, other public comment, just support for our next generation, making sure that that's, you know, from youth, K-12 education, we had a discussion about last meeting, just to make sure that that's really a key component to a healthy community, is making sure our future generation is able to have support and be a part of our community. And that touches a lot of different aspects throughout this chapter and others. So the first section, which is healthy community, so generally consistent with the draft. A few places where we made just some tweaks to kind of clean up some of the language, and align with some of the community impact received through the open houses. Some communication with staff through our Department of Human Services and your feedback. We added in or just kind of moved up the definition of healthy community within that section, just to frame that policy area. And added in then a policy related to support for K-12 education. So those were the portions there in that healthy community section, just high level. And paired with that healthy community, this next, we decided to just make, previously section 2 was lifelong services. We felt like this chapter is called healthy community, healthy economy. This should be policy 1 and 2. So number 2 is healthy economy. And so it's the same policies that were in economic sustainability for the most part. But it has really the addition of the critical community services and really speaks to kind of what that means, with the intent to be inclusive of the broader intent that those who perform these jobs, right, are critical not just for the function they perform, but also for the fabric of community. And that was really something that, you know, Joe, appreciate you really making sure that that was front and center, and also echoed much of the discussion with the Community Growth Committee. So that section now also has an introduction, just kind of defining what we mean when we talk about a healthy economy, a sustainable economy that is front and center within that policy section. And then we added in also just a little more description in the local pipelines for youth, just to recognize the intent for youth to be able to have opportunities just to remain or kind of feedback loops back to our community. So I think those are some really nice changes that communicate the real intent around healthy community, again, coming from a variety of different community partner feedback and the planning commission as well. Excuse me. The now third section, lifelong services, it's really consistent with the 815 draft. A few tweaks to align with human services and the Pickens County Age Friendly Initiative. Human services is there's a typo on this screen, and then the addition just of policies 3.3 and 3.4, just to identify those different strategies to support early childhood and then also for youth and families. So just detailing that out a little bit further to make sure that that's a recognition of how that policy is intended to support community and support working families. I'm moving through here for local food, this is consistent with the 815 draft. Some good feedback, really supported this in the open houses and the survey, just recognizing and identifying this as a specific area for importance. Number 5 is public safety and emergency response. Generally, this is carried forward. We did add what is policy 5.11, public safety education. There was a public comment in our last meeting and commissioner agreement to include this, just making sure that public safety, especially the communication around that, is important for both residents and visitors, especially if they're not on a county alert system. So that was a good addition, and that is included within this section 5. 6 is hazard mitigation. We pulled up the Pickens County hazard risk summary from the Pickens County Hazard Mitigation Plan and just kind of put that at the beginning just to make sure that we're kind of clear what we're talking about and reference that hazard mitigation plan. But generally these are consistent with the rest of the policies are consistent with what we had shared out in the 815 draft. So that's the wrap up on the community and economic health. So the majority of those changes really in that healthy economy to pull out that critical community services and make sure that the priorities that the Planning Commission identified at the last meeting were updated within the draft. Any questions there? Does that seem reasonable? Did we capture the intent? Put in some of the boring stuff. Joe, I know you're saying
Not
that
bo-
last
not
time.
boring.
Important, but
Boring.
any feedback there or generally seems reasonable?
Great, then we will launch
Okay.
into the last chapter,
Regional approach.
regional approach, and we can just go to the next slide again, grounding the chapter in community direction. The need for this, the community direction recognizes the need for regional coordination around the priorities of housing and transportation, the need to preserve and protect regional environmental systems, and to acknowledge quality of life as a regional concern, and to acknowledge that up valley decisions have down valley consequences for our workforce, right? So moving into the regional transportation section, Policies have been added to explore emerging technologies to address regional transportation challenges. I think that was a recommendation that came from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And an addition was made to 01.4 to support the Colorado Department of Transportation as a critical partner in the public transportation realm. And that's something that we brought up with you, Planning Commission, at the last work session, and was supported by internal staff as well. And then the next section speaks to regional climate action. Policy 02.5 was added to encourage funding and actions to support wildfire mitigation strategies, reduce the risk of wildfire and the related cost of homeowners insurance. This is something that was added in response, I don't remember whether this came from Planning and Zoning Commission, but I know we did get public feedback on this specific topic as something that needed to be added here. 02.6 was added to acknowledge the climate benefits associated with agricultural and conserved landscapes. That is something, that was a comment that we did receive as part of our public outreach. And then 02.3 was added to recommend development of a regional waste coalition to strengthen and align waste diversion strategies, to reduce waste streams of new and emerging renewable and high-performing building technologies. That came directly from Joe at the last work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I'm gonna keep going here unless you stop me. Watershed-wide environment protections. There was, again, generally consistent with the 815 draft. There was one change made, and this was in response to one of our planning commissioners' comments at the last work session. The policy was, in the 815 draft, was focused on headwaters interest. It's been updated to acknowledge the need to protect western slope water resources as a whole, in addition to headwaters interests. So that change was made, good addition, I think. And then moving to the last section.
It is.
It is, strategic partnerships. This section has been consolidated and reorganized to read more clearly, but the content remains essentially unchanged from the 815 draft plan. So that covers the policy changes that we've made since 815, and that are included in the 1216 draft that is in your packet. Any comments before I turn it back to Hannah Hunt to quickly walk us through the implementation, a really high-level discussion of the implementation matrix?
I have a question. Did we, it relates to O1 regional transportation. Was there any data gathering or study that went on this fall with the free RAFTA fares that would lead us to potentially lean in that direction? And is it something we would mention here as a potential option?
Yeah, RAFTA's doing an analysis that's gonna come out mid-January. They, did a small amount, I mean, they did some level of data collection. Interestingly, when you went on the bus, they didn't ask you where you were going, you just got on kind of for free and went. But they did do some surveys throughout that and are planning to release something that, kind of speaks to that. On a kind of my other side project, in speaking with some of their data analysts, I know that as of mid-November, they were seeing ridership up about 3.9%, like across all of their local hogback, BRT. Not wild, it's also off-season, and we certainly saw, the visitation numbers were not, indicated that there was much more of an off-season. So it will be interesting to see that kind of report and what comes out of that, but yes, there is something forthcoming that will be interesting to see how that, kind of fare or zero fare impacts ridership.
So Yeah, so in response to your question, we don't know yet whether that is something that we wanna recommend moving forward, the free fare as a policy. And I think, but important
But
to.
recognize that, I mean, this
yeah.
speaks to coordinating with RAFTA and looking at different strategies and
Yeah.
continuing to be,
Just on a broad level.
kind of in support of these different approaches, so certainly
As long
that's
as
the
you feel
intent.
like it's under the umbrella as it stands.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
And there's language that reducing barriers to promote affordable and accessible public
Yeah,
transportation throughout the region. I
Correct,
think that's, I think the language is there to support,
yeah.
if there's good data that comes out of that, but then it's, like, how do you fund it, obviously, but.
I'm laughing because that app is a barrier. It took me 15 minutes to get a fare to
Yeah.
come here tonight.
Yeah.
Good point, yeah.
Yeah.
But good question.
And I live here, it took me 15 minutes. For somebody
Right.
visiting, forget it, just get a car.
I know, the first time I got on the bus after the, free fare, I was like, oh, where's my ticket, I gotta pay again, this is hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah,
pre-commit, know which zone you're going.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, it will be interesting to see what comes out of that, and certainly will be, kind of a keen eye to how that plays out. Any other questions? So I think just to be clear, the next steps on these policies will be, we will make a few of these final tweaks. We've gotten some additional feedback, again, that just came through. We will review that, incorporate that into this document, and consolidate that into a final draft that then will be referred out. So if planning commission is good with, you feel like you've given us direction enough, we will make those changes and consolidate this plan, and then we'll have that ready for publishing for now the real public comment period would begin. So sounds like we have a thumbs up, am I
Yep.
reading that correctly? Great. Thank you for your work and your attention to detail as we move through this. So the next portion that we want to go through tonight is around the implementation matrix. And just to kind of remind us, so this is really the kind of actionable roadmap. This will function in part as a work plan that with a level of prioritization, so that as staff, we move through these different strategies. Certainly, the implementation matrix does not solve all of our, how will this happen, but really sets the direction to say, hey, we think this is a priority, we need to move this forward from a code update standpoint, which may include some additional analysis or some additional, the code writing work to move into that stage. The plan is that the implementation matrix will not be formally adopted with the plan. Part of that is that the implementation matrix will be more of a living document for us to continue to be able to use that as a work plan. But will, certainly be published to be accountable to these priorities as we move forward. But this will be something that we're able to update on a more routine, somewhat routine basis, and help us prioritize the implementation of the policies as we move forward. There are 4 main ways in which the actions are organized. Code updates, which is what we'll really focus on with you all, which will be things that you will see as they come forward as code updates. So that would be land use and building and energy code updates. Programs and policies, which are generally ongoing or existing initiatives that are programmatic and generally county-led. County plans, those would be actions that are associated with other broader planning efforts like climate action plan or hazard mitigation plan or the wildfire mitigation planning efforts. So pointing to other county planning documents. And then partner agencies, this is working with others, coordination with community partners on collaborative efforts. We're also organizing this to identify how these actions really relate to our values. So blue is bold climate action, balanced economy is that orange, rural preservation, and then equity and affordability. So again, just trying to really kind of tie this whole document back to, this is a values forward plan. What we want to go through with you is organized around priority level, which again intends to be something that helps us as staff organize the next steps related to what we will be moving forward, especially from the code update standpoint. So I'm going to pull up this document and we can then move through it. Let's pull that up, and I've highlighted the code updates. But the idea here would be to,
Did you select a screen?
let me pull this up and then I will
Yeah, you're.
re-screen.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to make this larger. Okay, get there.
And again, there's so much detail here and we're not really asking you to dive into the nuanced detail that's gonna really be the roadmap and drive our work plans, but to just have a look at the prioritization that we've assigned and just see if that seems right.
Yeah, with an eye toward the prioritization, what we have, so I'm gonna speak to what's on here so that we can take a look at this. I will say that when we, throughout the fall, when, the engagement that was through the series of 5 or so open houses and then a series of surveys, asked a question to the community around, hey, what of these different things should we prioritize from an implementation standpoint? So what you see here in terms of that priority level is informed by that community input. Also note that a lot of these that are the high priority are ones that are checking a lot of those community values. So there's synergy between, hey, this is bold climate action and rural preservation and, touches on the equity and affordability piece. So the intent is to align both community input as well as the kind of broader goals. The two areas where there are code updates are within the natural environment, the water section specifically, and then also in the built environment. But let's just start here within the natural environment. So in the water quality and quantity section, there's a lot outlined here, which is really around increased water adequacy requirements, both for new and redevelopment, requirements around groundwater, which is wells, well pump tests, well meters, standards to regulate ponds, permitting process to regulate high water outdoor amenity consumptive uses, regulatory process around the hauling of water for development and redevelopment, water-wise landscaping standards, and for outdoor efficiency of water use. Those are the ones in here that are listed as high. We've had some of those discussions with you all, as well as, again, that carries forward a variety of the specific ideas that came through the growth committee. I'll note, as you may remember, we are also working with a water land use consultant that's been a part of our team, looking at how do we align our code updates with the policies that are setting the groundwork. So these that are listed, these 7 or so that are listed as high, would be a priority for us to move forward from a code update standpoint in the near term. And then additionally in there is a water waste ordinance. That's something that came out of kind of interesting with some of the metro districts, is that you recognizing if there's a water waste ordinance in place, that gives some leverage to be able to identify water where it's being wasted and give some kind of backing to that. And indoor water efficiency, some additional indoor water efficiency standards, which again, helpful, may not be is listed as a medium priority, but not some of the heaviest hitting prioritization. There are other aspects on here that are programs and policies or partner agencies, but what we wanted to bring forward to you all is really the code updates again, because that will be much more in your lane and in your purview. Questions about that? Does that seem reasonable? Are there aspects that are missing here? Would love to get some feedback.
Looks good so far, yeah.
I can see that some of these things having to do with water, somebody get over there and put a cold cloth on Debbie's head because her heart is fluttering. Gosh, I would just like to say, and this is understated, wow, that's so important to see, and it's so interesting to see what the growth committee hammered out over those many months and then additional months. And the things that the P&Z has done, that they are, it's so interesting to see that we're all still in touch as a community. We have many of the same values, many of them.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Good work, good work.
Thank you. Joe or Chair, Zach? I'll continue here. So then on the agricultural lands, so this is the kind of prioritization high here is around reviewing definitions for agricultural structures, with specific considerations around greenhouse and hoop house. So looking at that related to the allowance for exempt floor area. And then what's listed below that is medium, but is really paired with that one above, so I maybe might recommend that we move that to high, but just looking at Pierre County requirements, of which there are several that have similar conditions to us, where looking at the way that they permit their agricultural structures could be useful as we consider some of those modifications.
Perhaps this is below a lower priority, but I know one discussion we've had locally is to define a commercial agricultural threshold beyond which we as a community would not want to support.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying we solved that. It's quite a discussion, but it is possibly a discussion that they want to entertain here.
Keep it on the list.
Section.
I think there's some policy direction in that vein, and whether, we'll have to see if it's articulated well as an implementation measure.
Yep, good, that's a good note. Anyone else? I'll kind of keep moving through here. The other one from a code update standpoint, and this is in the scenic quality with the natural environment. The first one has been completed, which feels great. But actions that, there's some things captured that have been on this list, and we've been continuing to work through this for a long time. But the lighting code in support of dark sky, high priority, and then review of scenic view standards, which is, kind of always coming out as a discussion. There's, I guess, as you'll note, additional code language around some requirements, or some additional policies that may set the stage for some code language around scenic view. So those are the two that are identified here in scenic quality. And
excuse me, I can't resist with the dark sky regulations. I can't help resist using Jim Breasted's name. He was on the Planning Commission for a long time. He was so involved in this community. He was the best kind of weird character in the community. And dark sky regulations were so important to him. And unfortunately, he died just a couple of years ago. But I think he is stirring in his grave as we see and hear that this has already been put into place. It would thrill him.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the dark.
In the dark, right,
Well
thank you.
said.
Thank you, Suzanne Cascade. Suzanne Wolf, I'll
I
let you,
just know, I know
please.
Debbie, you were gonna need to scoot a little bit before 7, so I just wanted you to kind of look at timing and think about,
Sure.
how much you think you can accomplish.
We're gonna, yeah, we are, just one more here on the environmental, and then we'll jump into the climate. Is there anything, Debbie, specifically, if you, that would be important for you to weigh in on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's all, just the part that I reviewed is all good, so. Just continue on. I've got 10 minutes.
Okay, we'll keep going. So environmental hazards, that's really just a recognition of continuing to update regulations as well as mapping related to best available tools and resources for environmental hazards. So that is something that kind of continues to be on the work program for ComDev, but is identified here just as a priority from an environmental hazard standpoint. I'm going to move us into, so in the built environment, so the climate action section, again, some of this has started to take place. So building code to include a square footage tiering system with net zero energy and net zero emissions designations. Jeffrey Erickson brought that forward with the square footage tiering through the updates to the building code last year. And the additional building performance standards to again focus on the limitation of overall energy consumption is another piece in there that just kind of continues to be a priority to roll in, which is both thinking about that from the building square footage as well as the site as well.
Can we add something to the sensitivity with regard to partners on these goals? The reason I say this is because the county required not only solar but battery backup, generally under the idea that Holy Cross would support the installation of batteries, and Holy Cross pulled their program. So that cost is squarely on the homeowner now. That happens all the time in subsidized types of relationships. I just wonder if we could add a sensitivity to that moving forward, so as not to rely upon that outside support and have that pulled and then increase the costs on citizens of our county.
Yeah, recognition with partners, and I think that there's a caveat too with this implementation, right? Like this is our best shot to identify how we can move this forward. Certainly there will be outside forces outside of our control that, impact this, and but this is certainly our most fullest intent is to move these different items forward again in recognizing that there's aspects beyond our control. But that's a good note to make sure that partnership sensitivity is a good word. So thank you for that, Joe. In the land use, so under land use patterns, and really under land use is where, and this is, the exciting part is to really pull kind of somewhat verbatim from the CGAC, the Growth Committee report, and say, okay, here's what we want to, we've got the policy environment and the comprehensive plan policies. Now we're able to really continue to identify this as what our next step is to update code with regard to these recommendations. So the intensity studies come back in, bringing those into some of the development standards related to the land use code updates, as well as under here, looking at special events and short-term rentals and reducing the impact of those activities, so some restriction and regulation related to those activities in rural unincorporated Pitkin County. So those are aspects that come forward in the land use code. Development standards. So there's a lot in here that's really familiar from a growth committee recommendation, so the floor area ratio and allowable floor area. The intent there to have the home sized appropriately scaled to its parcel. The square footage cap for residential floor area, portion of that has already taken place. Strategies to incentivize and streamline small homes, and implement square footage tiering for development and redevelopment. Bold development standards pertaining to the development of a parcel, capturing the climate and natural environment, economic and quality of life goals. The updates to the growth management criteria, that's a significant one, as Suzanne was mentioning, so updating that criteria to better reflect our community values and the articulation of those values as identified in the policies. New floor area allocation system for residential development that again is above that base floor maximum, generally that 5750. The updates to the TDR system to both maintain the overall intent of the program to protect rural character, but identifying these different opportunities to make modifications. And this is, there has been throughout this, over the kind of same time frame as the policy work, some specific research done on TDRs to evaluate our current system and then make recommendations for modification. So those are code changes that will be coming forward. So those that are in that darker blue are really the items that are highest priority as identified by CGAC, additional community input, kind of broader community values. And then also important, but in the medium priority, are opportunities to utilize zoning overlays to limit residential square footage. Many caucuses have done this successfully for limitations to their maximum residential square footage. Requirements to address the water and energy efficiency standards beyond baseline code requirements, identifying that there's both an energy and water cost, those are often linked. Codifying existing climate-related orientation guidelines that's specific for driveway and for kind of solar orientation. Standards to limit the area disturbed by buildings and development activity. Again, the intent there is to mitigate impacts on the natural environment that take place as a result of development activity. Standards to require native and regionally adapted plants, kind of going beyond just the revegetation requirements that are in the code now. So those are aspects that are prioritized as both high and medium in the development standards, which is really where a lot of the code updates will be happening. I wanna just make sure, and Debbie especially, is that prioritization seem accurate? Is there anything else from the history of the growth committee that is important to make sure that we move forward here?
When you say rural area, I'm sorry,
No, go ahead,
is that being defined formally now? As I saw later on in the packet, where we had remote, rural, semi-rural, semi-urban, et cetera, et cetera. Are we considering those now defined terms to be used within land use code?
We are intending to put, that kind of character map that you'll recall, right, the transect that talks about those different areas. We're using that as really a kind of illustrative description. Here's what, when we say rural, kind of what does that mean? Here's kind of what we mean. The intent is that we would put those definitions in place so that we have a more kind of common understanding of what we mean. There's not, at least at this point, the intent to say, hey, that's going to be directly translated into a zoning overlay or the zoning, for example, but intending to use those terms to put some kind of commonality in terms of how we're using rural, yes, but not, at least for now, not intent to codify that.
I think the prioritization is good on that stuff, yeah.
Great,
Great.
thank you.
Shall I keep kind of running through this? This is high
We're getting
level.
there, just about.
Yeah, so site constraints, Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code, that's on the docket coming soon. And that's in the site constraints, as well as that just kind of further implementation of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which is generally points back to that resiliency code. Community housing, specifically, one of the aspects that has received a lot of input and a lot of interest from many different directions is the CDU, caretaker dwelling units, both in terms of that total square footage, as well as just strategies to better leverage our existing caretaker dwelling units to support the broader goal of housing our community. And so that is really prioritized within the community housing section as the kind of highest code update. So I will, let's see, buildings, kind of within the building performance standards and the tiering that exists today, kind of continuing to use that to further build out the building performance standards as those relate to those building tiers, so those square footage tiers, again, with an intent to really incentivize small homes and encourage the maintenance and support of smaller existing homes. That's something that we've continued to hear is not just new builds, but hey, I've got an existing home, what type of support and resources are there that we can both put in place and also point to existing resources. So that certainly is a big priority within the buildings. That is kind of a code update, but also may bleed into some programmatic aspects. And the Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Code, again, kind of called out there. And buildings as well, so regulations for redevelopment, reduce energy consumption, reduce site impacts, reduce the overall residential square footage. So that's a place where redevelopment shows up again. There's the note to Joe, I'm just responding to your comment from earlier about education. You can make sure that that's kind of education and coordination with other jurisdictions and their kind of codes probably would make sense to live there, so we can make sure that gets woven in.
That's it.
Is this
And-
being recorded?
Yes.
It is,
Catch the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's actually, I think, all we were gonna cover under the implementation matrix.
so those are the aspects that are related to code updates. There's a lot in the implementation matrix, but again, the others are programs and policies, county plans, or working with partner agencies. So I would like to just that's the rest of the code updates, but generally, does that direction in the implementation matrix, how does that sit with you all? Any feedback there from the planning commission?
Great.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, and our,
If I could get
Yeah.
a copy of that for next time we sit down with this.
I'm happy to just give you mine. Yeah.
It is, it's in your packet, but we can make you a hard
Okay.
copy, is that what you're asking
See them in
for?
the packet, yeah, I'm sorry.
It is attachment C.
It's attachment C in the packet, yeah.
Would you like a hard copy, or would you prefer to?
No, I'll.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the attachment,
Really put it all together.
yep,
It
Yep.
can be weird sometimes, but I do that.
yeah, and I would just note again that this is something that we will use, and this level of prioritization as kind of a staff document that we help us as our kind of roadmap to carry out the implementation of the policies and the comp plan. So this is an important document for us as kind of our next steps, and will continue to be something that you know, we will check in on at some level.
And then just to close on next steps, very briefly, thank you for all of the input. Hannah Hunt and I will spend the month of January compiling, you know, the input we've received to date, from you all, and putting together a final draft of the plan, which we will refer out at the end of January to caucuses, municipalities, adjacent counties, land managers, and the like. And then in February, we will come back to we will hold a work group meeting just to bring the work group up to speed on process and content. And then we will schedule Planning and Zoning Commission public hearings in March, we hope, for adoption of the plan. And that will be followed by Board of County Commissioners approval subsequent to the P and Z adoption. Hoping to initiate land use code updates in spring of 2026. So with that, thank you for all your hard work, and we'll be back to you before you know it. It'll be time to get into public hearings for adoption.
I'd just like to say again, I'm so proud of this community, so proud of the county and what they have done, extremely proud of the CGAC. It's this, all that you've shown us tonight illustrates again how broadly and well the CGAC represented the community, and what a good job the commissioners did in narrowing the candidates down from, I think, 96 to something like 29. That it was such a broad-based group, and I'm thrilled and proud of all of this. Thank you for all of your hard work.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Great, yeah, thank you guys for all your hard work and all the time you put into this. Really appreciate it, the board does.
Thank you.
Thank you, and yeah, we couldn't have done it without you, thank you.
Next meeting, January 20th,
Wildfire.
for land use wildfire resiliency code, would be great. Awesome, well, I would, do you have anything else? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned, thank you everyone for your time, thank you Suzanne.
So is the recording stopped?
Not yet, sorry.
Nope,
Trying to
just
get there.
checking before I